Ever wondered why we celebrate Halloween? Well, let's turn back the hands of time and find out. The story of Halloween begins over 2,000 years ago with the ancient Celts, a group of people living in what is now Ireland, the United Kingdom, and northern France. They celebrated their new year on November 1st, marking the end of summer and the harvest season and the beginning of the long, dark, cold winter. This period was often associated with human death, and the Celts believed that on the night before their new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. On October 31st, they celebrated Samhain, when it was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to Earth, causing trouble and damaging crops. But it wasn't all gloom and doom. The presence of these otherworldly spirits also made it easier for the Druids, or Celtic priests, to predict the future. These prophecies were a source of comfort and direction during the dark winter months. To commemorate this event, the Celts wore costumes, typically consisting of animal heads and skins, and attempted to tell each other's fortunes. As part of the celebration, the Celts built huge sacred bonfires where they burned crops and animals as sacrifices to their deities. During the celebration, the Celts wore costumes made of animal skins and heads, and they told each other's fortunes. When the celebration was over, they relit their hearth fires from the sacred bonfire to help protect them during the coming winter. Fast forward to the present day, and we see echoes of these ancient Samhain traditions in our modern Halloween celebrations. From the costumes to the bonfires and even the idea of spirits walking among us, it's clear that while Halloween has evolved over the centuries, it still retains a link to its ancient Celtic roots. Thus, Halloween, as it is known today, has its earliest origins in the Celtic festival of Samhain. But how did a Celtic festival transition into a Christian observance, you might ask? Well, the answer lies in the rich tapestry of history. In a time when the Roman Empire was spreading its wings, reaching the far corners of the world, including the Celtic lands. As the Romans made their way to these Celtic regions, they started to integrate their own customs with those of the local people. The Celtic festival of Samhain, a celebration marking the end of the harvest season and the onset of winter, began to intertwine with Roman traditions. The Romans had two festivals around the same time of year: Feralia, a day in late October when they traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead, and a day to honor Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. The apple-bobbing tradition of Halloween could possibly have originated from the latter. In the 4th century, Christianity began to permeate the Roman Empire. As it spread, the Church sought ways to incorporate local customs into its religious observances in order to ease the transition for new converts. The Celtic festival of Samhain, with its focus on the supernatural and the afterlife, provided an apt platform for such a fusion. Thus, the Christian Church established a day to honor all the saints, known initially as All Martyrs' Day, later expanding to include All Saints and becoming All Saints' Day. The day before All Saints' Day, October 31st, began to be called All Hallows' Eve and was observed with vigils, prayers, and fasting. This blending of cultures and traditions, this melding of the pagan and the Christian, was a careful, deliberate process. It was an effort to respect and acknowledge the beliefs of the people while gently steering them towards Christian practices. As centuries passed, All Hallows' Eve gradually morphed into what we now call Halloween. The customs, the traditions, the celebrations, they all evolved, taking on different forms and meanings across different cultures and centuries. And that's the beauty of it all. Halloween, as we know it today, is a testament to the power of cultural exchange and adaptation. Have you ever questioned why we dress up on Halloween? The answer to this question takes us on a journey back in time, to an era steeped in superstition and folklore. The tradition of dressing up on Halloween has its roots in the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. The Celts believed that on the night of October 31st, the boundary between the living and the dead blurred, and spirits roamed the earth. To protect themselves from these wandering spirits, the Celts would don costumes and masks. They thought disguising themselves as harmful spirits would prevent the real ones from recognizing them. This way, they could avoid being possessed or harmed. The costumes they wore were often made from animal skins and heads, a far cry from the superhero and princess outfits we see today. As time passed, This tradition evolved and was influenced by Roman and Christian practices. When the Romans conquered the Celtic territories, they merged Samhain with their own festivals. One of these was Feralia, a day in late October when the Romans traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead. Later, as Christianity spread across these lands, the Church established a day to honor all saints and martyrs, known as All Hallows Day or All Saints' Day. The night before became All Hallows Eve, and eventually, Halloween. On this night, poor people would visit the houses of wealthier families and receive pastries called soul cakes in return for praying for the family's dead relatives. This practice, known as souling, saw people dressing up in costumes, a tradition that likely drew from the Celtic practice of disguising oneself during Samhain. Fast forward to the present day, and the tradition of dressing up for Halloween has become a fun and creative activity. We might not be warding off evil spirits, but we're certainly keeping a centuries-old tradition alive. So, dressing up on Halloween is actually an age-old tradition to ward off any lurking spirits. And what about the tradition of trick-or-treating? Where did that come from? Well, let's take a step back in time. The origins of trick-or-treating can be traced back to the medieval tradition of souling and guising. In the Middle Ages, on All Hallows Eve, poor people would go from door to door offering prayers for the dead in return for food. This custom was known as souling. Souling was a practice that was believed to help the dead on their spiritual journey. People would give out soul cakes, a small round cake often marked with a cross, to the soulers. In return, the soulers would pray for the household's departed loved ones. Meanwhile, guising was another medieval custom where people would dress up in costumes and perform short plays, songs, or tricks in exchange for food or drink. This was particularly popular in Scotland and Ireland. The term guising comes from the word disguise, referring to the costumes worn by the performers. As time moved on, these two traditions began to merge. Children started to partake in the custom, going from door to door asking for food or money. This evolved into what we now know as trick-or-treating. The trick part of the phrase refers back to the guising tradition, where tricks would be performed in exchange for treats. When Irish and Scottish immigrants brought Halloween to America in the 19th century, the tradition of trick-or-treating came along with it. Initially, it was more about the tricks, often involving pranks and mischief. But by the mid-20th century, the focus had shifted more to the treats, especially candy, and the trick-or-treating we know today was born. So next time you see children dressed up in costumes, going from door to door asking for candy, remember the centuries-old traditions of souling and guising that started it all. That's how the medieval practice of souling and guising eventually became the trick-or-treating we know today. But why is Halloween celebrated on October 31st? Well, the answer takes us back to the ancient Celtic calendar. The Celts, who lived over 2,000 years ago in the area that is now Ireland, the United Kingdom, and northern France, celebrated their new year on November 1st. This day marked the end of summer and the harvest, and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was often associated with human death. The Celts believed that on the night before the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. They celebrated Samhain on October 31st, when it was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to Earth. The presence of the otherworldly spirits was thought to make it easier for the Druids or Celtic priests to make predictions about the future, a source of comfort and direction during the long, dark winter. To commemorate this event, Druids built huge, sacred bonfires where the people gathered to burn crops and animals as sacrifices to the Celtic deities. During the celebration, the Celts wore costumes, typically consisting of animal heads and skins, and attempted to tell each other's fortunes. As centuries passed and Christianity took hold, the early church sanctified these pagan holidays to ease the spiritual transition. November 1st became All Saints' Day, a time to honor saints and martyrs. The day before All Saints' Day, October 31st, began to be called All Hallows Eve, and over time it morphed into what we now know as Halloween. So, while many of our Halloween traditions may seem strange or even random, they have roots in ancient celebrations and beliefs. The choice of October 31st as the date for Halloween is tied to the Celtic calendar, the changing of the seasons, and the human fascination with the boundary between life and death. So, October 31st, marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, became the date for Halloween. How did Halloween evolve into the holiday we know today? Well, as we crossed into the 20th century, Halloween began to lose its religious and superstitious undertones. Instead, it started to transform into a more community-centered celebration. With the influx of immigrants, especially those from Ireland and Scotland, Halloween took on a new form. The tradition of going door to door, asking for food or money, morphed into today's trick-or-treating. The commercialization of Halloween also played a significant role in shaping the holiday we know today. It started subtly. Postcards depicting witches, black cats, and jack-o'-lanterns began to circulate, and by the 1920s, Halloween had become a secular, community-centered holiday, with parades and town-wide parties as the featured entertainment. But of course, Halloween wouldn't be what it is without its iconic symbols. The jack-o'-lantern, a staple of Halloween, has its roots in an Irish myth about a man named Stingy Jack, who tricked the devil and was denied entry into both heaven and hell. He was doomed to wander the earth with only a burning coal to light his way, which he placed inside a carved-out turnip. Irish immigrants brought this tale to America but found pumpkins, a fruit native to America, to be the perfect fit for their lanterns. Moving on to witches, they have been associated with Halloween since the holiday's inception. The image of the witch flying on her broomstick is thought to have originated from ancient pagan traditions, where the poor would go around town begging for food, and when denied, would leave behind a broom as a sign of the curse they would place on the household. Halloween has indeed come a long way from its ancient Celtic roots, becoming a blend of community celebration, superstition, and commercialism. And as we continue to carve pumpkins, dress up in costumes, and enjoy sweet treats, the spirit of Halloween lives on, evolving with each passing year. But why is it called Halloween? Now that's a question that brings us back to the olden times of the British Isles. The term Halloween is of Scottish origin, and it's a contracted version of the phrase All Hallows Eve. If we break it down, All Hallows Eve refers to the evening before All Hallows Day, also known as All Saints' Day, which is celebrated on November 1st. The word hallow, derived from the Old English word hallig, means holy or sacred. So All Hallows essentially refers to all the holy ones, or in other words, all the saints. The use of Eve in All Hallows Eve is a nod to the tradition of celebrating major feasts on the night before the actual day, a practice that dates back to the early days of the Christian Church. But how did All Hallows Eve become Halloween? Well, the transformation happened over time, thanks to linguistic shifts and cultural adaptations. It began with the Scots, who shortened All Hallows Eve to All Hallows Even. In Scots, even is short for evening, and over time, the last E was dropped, transforming even into Ian. So All Hallows Eve became All Hallows Ian, which was further shortened to Halloween. As the tradition traveled across the Atlantic to North America, the apostrophe, which indicated the elision of the letter V, was eventually dropped, and Halloween became the Halloween we know today. This journey of the name Halloween is a testament to how language evolves and adapts, reflecting changes in society, culture, and tradition. It's fascinating, isn't it? How a simple name can carry within it centuries of history, linking us back to traditions and celebrations of yore. And that's how All Hallows Eve was shortened to Halloween, a name that's stuck around for centuries. How did Halloween spread worldwide, you may ask? The answer to this question takes us back to the 19th century, when a significant wave of Irish and Scottish immigrants docked on the shores of North America. These immigrants carried with them more than just their belongings. They brought along their rich cultural heritage, traditions, and of course, the celebration of Halloween. In its early days in North America, Halloween was far from the widely celebrated holiday that it is today. Initially, it was mostly observed within the Irish and Scottish communities. The tradition of Halloween was a tether to their homelands, a comforting piece of familiar culture in a strange new world. They continued their old world traditions of carving jack-o'-lanterns, telling ghost stories, and dressing up in costumes. The turn of the 20th century saw a shift in the perception of Halloween, as the immigrants and their traditions became more integrated into North American society. Halloween began to lose its ethnic ties and started to be embraced by people of all backgrounds. It evolved from being a regional celebration to a national and eventually a global phenomenon. The spread of American culture in the 20th century helped propel Halloween onto the global stage. American movies, television shows, and pop culture references introduced the world to the spooky charm of Halloween. Today, you can find Halloween celebrations in various forms across the globe, from the United Kingdom to Japan, each adding their unique cultural spin to the holiday. In the end, Halloween's global spread is a testament to the enduring appeal of its core elements: a fascination with the supernatural, the joy of dress-up, and the simple pleasure of a good scare. It's a holiday that transcends cultural boundaries, bringing people together in a shared celebration of all things spooky. So the Halloween we celebrate today is a global phenomenon, owing much to the Irish and Scottish immigrants of the 19th century. Their traditions, carried across oceans, have left a lasting impact on the world, making Halloween a truly international celebration. Ever wonder why we give out candy on Halloween? Well, it's not just because it's a sweet treat that kids love. The tradition of giving out candy on Halloween has its roots in the past, but it's a story that was also shaped by modern commercial influences. Let's take a step back in time. Halloween itself is a holiday steeped in tradition, with roots in ancient Celtic festivals, Roman feasts, and Christian holy days. The act of giving out treats during these celebrations was a common practice, but the treats of yesteryears were far from the sugary confections we know today. They were often fruits, nuts, or even small cakes. But as Halloween evolved and became popular in the United States, the tradition of trick-or-treating began to take shape. Children would go door to door, asking for a treat in exchange for a promise not to play a trick. The treats given out during this time were still quite varied, ranging from homemade goodies to small toys. So, when did candy take center stage? Enter the mid-20th century, when mass-produced candies started to become affordable and widely available. Candy companies saw Halloween as a golden opportunity to market their products. They promoted their candies as a safe, convenient, and fun choice for Halloween treats. The idea took off. By the 1970s and 80s, giving out packaged candy had become the norm. It was seen as safer than homemade treats, which parents worried could be tampered with. Plus, candy had a longer shelf life, making it easy for families to stock up in advance of the big night. And let's not forget the kids, who were more than happy to trade a night of tricks for a bag full of their favorite candies. The relationship between Halloween and candy had become so inseparable that it's hard to imagine one without the other. So there you have it, a blend of tradition, commercial opportunity, and a love for all things sweet created the perfect recipe for the Halloween candy tradition. And that's how the tradition of giving out candy on Halloween came to be. So, what have we learned about Halloween? Quite a lot, I'd say. We've journeyed back to the origins of Halloween, tracing its roots to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. This was a time when the veil between our world and the spirit world was believed to be thinnest, with bonfires lit and costumes donned to ward off roaming spirits. From there, we transitioned to All Hallows' Eve. This Christian holiday was a time for remembering the dead, including saints, martyrs, and all the faithful departed. Over time, it merged with Samhain, leading to many of the traditions we associate with Halloween today. And speaking of traditions, we touched on the custom of dressing up. This practice evolved from the belief that disguises could protect one from harmful spirits. Today, it's a chance for everyone, young and old, to step into another character's shoes, if only for a night. Then we explored the origins of trick-or-treating, rooted in the medieval practice of souling, where the poor would go door to door offering prayers for the dead in exchange for food. It has certainly come a long way to the fun-filled candy-collecting activity it is now. We also discovered why October 31st is such a significant date. It marked the end of summer and the harvest, and the beginning of the cold, dark winter, a time often associated with death in many cultures. We then tracked the evolution of Halloween, watching as it transformed from a primarily religious observance to a more secular and commercially driven celebration. The question of why it's called Halloween was also answered. The name Halloween is a contraction of All Hallows' Eve, signifying the eve of All Saints' Day. And finally, we looked at how Halloween spread globally, and the sweet tradition of giving out candy, which has its roots in souling and guising, but has evolved into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Whether it's the dressing up, trick-or-treating, or giving out candy, now you know the fascinating history behind the Halloween traditions we all enjoy.